All right. Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This Humanists for Harris call is brought to you by Secular Democrats of America, a network of Democrats advocating for secular governance, promoting respect and inclusion of non-religious voters in the Democratic Party, and mobilizing non-religious voters to elect Democrats up and down the ballot. I want to thank Sarah Levin of the Secular Democrats of America for organizing tonight's event, all of our speakers for making time this evening, all of you for joining in. My name is Hemant Mehta. I write at friendlyatheist.com. I've been covering politics and religion for many years, and I'm so excited that we are able to do this tonight. Through the course of the evening, you are going to see links because more than anything, we want to make sure all of you are able to donate if you can to the Harris Walz campaign, and even more importantly, perhaps, volunteer. And you will see the links in the chat where you can volunteer in your community, how you can help out, what you can do. And with that, we are going to get started. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping and let you know that as people speak, we fully encourage you to use the reaction emojis at the very bottom of your screens. Let us know how you're feeling because I know there's not as much interaction just because we are limited in that. Closed captioning is also available. You can turn that on by clicking the CC button in your meeting controls. And remember that this webinar is being recorded. We will post it. We will post clips later. And when we do that, please, please, please share them with everyone you know. Just flood your own Facebook feed with them so there is something good in that feed for everyone you know. And more than anything, just make sure you are signing up to volunteer and donate. All right. And with that, let's get started. Our first speaker tonight is Greg Epstein. He is the humanist chaplain at Harvard University and MIT. He's the author of Good Without God, What a Billion Non-Religious People Do Believe. And he's the author of the soon-to-be-published Tech Agnostic, How Technology Became the World's Most Powerful Religion and Why It Desperately Needs a Reformation. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Greg Epstein.
Thank you, Hemant, and thank you, Sarah, Sasha, and all my friends on the call. Two paragraphs from my book, Good Without God, from 15 years ago. Humanism is a bold, resolute response to the fact that being a human being is lonely and frightening. We humanists take one look at a world in which the lives of thousands of innocent children are ripped away each year by hurricanes, earthquakes, and other acts of God, not to mention the thousand of other fundamental injustices of life. And we conclude that if the universe we live in does not have competent moral management, then so be it. We must become the superintendents of our own lives. Humanism means taking charge of the often lousy world around us and working to shape it into a better place, though we know we will not ever finish the task. In short, humanism is being good without God, an affirmation of the greatest common human value, the desire to live with dignity, to be good. But humanism is also a warning that we cannot afford to wait until tomorrow or until the next life to be good, because today, the short journey we get from birth to death, from womb to tomb, is all we have. And finally, two sentences from this week. Humanists must do more to fight for the human rights of all, to stop injustice, bigotry, and even genocidal campaigns waged in our names. So let's come together and donate and volunteer to become one of the core constituencies in Harris and Walz's diverse coalition, so we can help more and even pressure our leaders to build a better world for all human beings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. As Greg was saying, there's a lot of people on this call, and not everyone necessarily shares every single value in a big tent. That's the beauty of humanism. We are like organizing cats, it is said. But change begins when you elect people who are receptive to reason and gives us the environment from which we can organize. And with that, let me introduce you to Sasha Sagan. She is the author of Small Creatures Such as We and host of the podcast Strange Customs. And not only will she speak, she will introduce us to a special guest as well.
Thank you so much, Hannah, and I'm so delighted to be with you all tonight. I mean, sick with anxiety about the election, but delighted nonetheless. Especially Congressman Raskin and Congressman Huffman, both of whom I admire so much, and the aforementioned special guest, my brilliant mom, who I get to introduce soon. Part of why I'm so grateful to be here is that when I was young and beginning my life as a person who participated in politics, I turned 18 on the day of the 2000 election. It was an extremely dramatic experience. But we would always used to hear the phrase values voters, referring usually to very conservative, very devout right-wing section of the electorate. It was as if the rest of us weren't voting on our values, as though valuing science, the environment, social justice, equal rights, equal access to healthcare are somehow unworthy ideas to build a philosophy and a worldview upon. And I feel it is high time that we make our values known. There is something antithetical to authoritarianism and xenophobia in humanism. Maybe tens of thousands of years ago, when we lived in small bands and understood so little about our universe, about our world, about ourselves, maybe then there was some advantage to this trait. But the cosmic perspective has given us a village of 8 billion and counting. We can see now that the divisions between groups are artificial and superficial. We have so much more in common than what divides us. And when we zoom out, we see so clearly that we are all in it together. The one thing I really do admire about religion, though I am not a believer, is the way it forms communities that come together to celebrate and in times of need. This is a time of need for our community, for our country, for our village of 8 billion and counting. So get involved, sign up to Phone Bank, to volunteer for the Harris Walz campaign. Not only does it help us cross the finish line in those swing states, but it feels so good to put our values into action, I promise. Now I get to introduce one of the two people who instilled me with said values, my beautiful mom, Andrian. She served as the creative director of NASA's legendary Voyager interstellar message. She co-wrote the original Cosmos series with her late husband, my sweet dad, Carl Sagan. And together they co-authored several books, co-created the motion picture Contact. She wrote and directed and produced Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, more recently, for which she won the Emmy and Peabody Awards. Cosmos Possible Worlds is both the title of her third season and the companion book she wrote. Mom?
Daughter, I am so proud of you and so overwhelmed with a feeling of admiration and love that I've almost forgotten what I wanted to say. Like you, and so many of us, I have found myself very fearful about the possible outcome of the election. And I've been trying of late to focus more on what the outcome that we all devoutly hope for could mean to us, what it could mean to our world, what it could mean to the people in Ukraine with their backs against the walls, fighting tonight, what it could mean to our daughters and granddaughters to know that being female is not a disqualification. What it could mean to those of us who love reason and science and openness and free expression, and to live without censorship and to live without superstition. All of those dreams that we have, think of how much more confident we would be about our future, about the environment. You know, we have lived through, and I certainly don't need to tell this community of reason what it was like to live through those 4 years and what it could be like to have a president we admire and who has the qualifications and the achievements that are necessary to take such an awesome responsibility. So in your donations, in your giving, in your support for Kamala Harris and Walz, please reach deeply into those pockets and support the other Democrats that we need to win in order to make this victory meaningful. So I want to thank you so much for being part of this evening. It gives me a great deal of hope. And it's not that I think that this election will be the last time we have to work and struggle and fight for the things we believe in. But we have the opportunity right now to fight for something that will mean that in the aftermath, we can hope for the future that our daughters and our sons and our grandchildren devoutly deserve. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Such inspiring words. And remember, in addition to donating and volunteering, which you should do, remember that nothing is more powerful than you talking to the people you're close to and telling them how you are voting, that you are voting, why you urge all of them to vote as well. Nothing is going to change the barometer of the election more than your own personal testimony. And as non-religious people, isn't that something we love to do? Tell people about our opinions. With that, let me introduce our next two speakers. They include, first, Representative Jared Huffman. He represents California's 2nd Congressional District, which spans from the Golden Gate Bridge all the way north to the Oregon border. He's been in Congress since 2012, and he is the co-founder of the Congressional Freethought Caucus, which launched in 2018. This year, he launched the Congressional Task Force to stop Project 2025. And speaking with him is Dr. Michael Mann. Dr. Mann is the Presidential Distinguished Professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also the director of the Penn Center for Science, Sustainability, and the Media. Congressman Huffman and Dr. Mann, the floor is yours.
Well, Hemet, thank you so much. And I'm really honored to share this time with Dr. Michael Mann, who is the most brilliant climate scientist that I know. And here I am with a political science degree. I do not have a PhD in astrophysics like Michael here. But Dr. Mann and I do have one credential in common. We are both proud recipients of the Humanist of the Year Award. Right. And perhaps that common humanism gives us a basis to have this conversation. I could, by the way, gush about the rest of this fabulous lineup for quite some time, but let me just say it's a real honor to be in this rarefied air. I am fired up to win this election, to save our secular democracy, and to get to work with a Harris-Walz administration on keeping this planet livable for our kids and grandkids. And I'm also really proud of this secular community for stepping up. You know, humanists and our fellow religious skeptics are the fastest growing and one of the largest religious demographics in this country. We have far greater numbers and should have more political influence than the extremists who want to impose their religious views and determine all of our rights and drive our policies and institutions in a big, diverse secular democracy. We can't let that happen. So it is time for us to organize and to take our place in the political arena, because this country, and I think Dr. Mann would agree, this planet needs humanists. So if I could, I'd like to kick off and kick it over to Dr. Mann by focusing on what's at stake for the climate on November 5th. Again, with my political science degree, Dr. Mann, it seems to me that we have record high levels of carbon pollution that are continuing to get worse. We know we have to reduce global carbon pollution to net zero by mid-century in order to keep warming to around 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is still pretty bad, but maybe not catastrophic. And so it seems to me that we're in a race both against carbon pollution and time, and that winning slowly is the same thing as losing as we consider this choice between Donald Trump and the Project 2025 agenda of rolling back the IRA and taking us out of the Paris Agreement again and building all kinds of new fossil fuel infrastructure that will lock in decades of additional carbon pollution, or a Harris-Walz administration where we're still going to have our work cut out to drive bold climate policy, but at least they accept climate science and want to keep working and building on the progress we've achieved so far. Seems like night and day to me. Do you see it the same way, Dr. Mann? And again, it's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, well, the honor's mine, Jared. It's great to share the stage with you and so many heroes of mine who are part of this call today, both Ann Dryan and Sasha Sagan. Of course, I can feel the connection with one of my great heroes, Carl Sagan, tonight in this virtual room. And I think he would frame things very much the way you have. We are at a juncture. He, back in the late 1990s, Carl sort of foresaw a potential future. He saw a dystopian future where, we give in to superstition and anti-science and pseudoscience. He feared that we would arrive at such a place, and we are there now. We are at a pivot point. We are at a hinge point. This is a fork in the road, because there is a future that's still possible that you allude to, where we take the actions necessary to preserve our planet for future generations, for our children and grandchildren. That's still a possible future, a future where we keep warming below 1.5 Celsius, 3 degrees Fahrenheit warming of the planet. Beyond that level of warming, we start to see far worse consequences. And look, dangerous climate change is already here. Just look at what we've witnessed over the last several weeks with Hurricane Helene and Milton, and the tremendous death and destruction. And there are already studies that have come out that show that, for example, the flooding from Helene was 50% more because of human-caused warming than it would otherwise be. That means there are people who perished, hundreds of people who died in that one event, because of the amplified effects that climate change is having on these extreme weather events. So dangerous climate change is here, but we can keep it within our adaptive capacity if, as you say, we act with urgency. We reduce carbon emissions dramatically over the next 10 years, bring them down to zero by mid-century. That is still possible. The obstacles aren't physical and they're not technological. At this point, they are entirely political, and political obstacles can be overcome. But that's the choice we face. And it couldn't be a more stark choice, because on the one hand, we have Kamala Harris, who will continue with the progress that we've made under the current administration. We need to do much more, as you say, but at least we're on the right path and we're making progress, and we're starting to bend that carbon emissions curve downward. That's one choice. The other choice is where we go backward. We eliminate all of the progress that we have made for decades, and the US cedes its role as leaders. If we don't lead on this issue, then the rest of the world isn't going to come to the table. We are the world's largest legacy polluter. If we don't lead, if we don't take action ourselves, then we will fail to achieve the global action necessary to avert climate catastrophe. So that's the choice. It couldn't be more stark. That's why it's so important to turn out and vote for Democrats all the way down the ticket, of course, for Harris and Walz, but also we need a Democratic Senate. We need a Democratic House if we are going to make any progress on climate and any of the other things that we all care about.
Yeah, here. A little more about the connection between humanism, sort of a fact-based, science-based worldview, and climate action. The way I see it, it's a straight line. If you accept science and want to do critical thinking to make your public policy, you have to be a climate hawk. You have to step up. And if you believe that this is all there is, as Greg Epstein said in his humanist invocation, that we won't have do-overs in an afterlife, that thoughts and prayers are not going to help us, then there's a real urgency, an imperative for us as humanists to do what we can to face this crisis. How do you see it from your humanist perspective, Doctor?
Yeah, I see it the same way. I mean, it's about science and reason. It's about, you know, nobody else is going to come in here and save us. It is up to us to take the actions necessary to preserve the only planet. And of course, you know, one of the things that that Carl spoke so eloquently about was sort of the quest for extraterrestrial life and looking for other life forms in the universe and wondering, you know, why we're not hearing from them. Does that tell us something about the nature of civilizations to self-destruct? It's up to us. We can choose not to self-destruct, but we are at that pivot point, as I said, and appealing to, you know, a deity, a god, whatever you want to call it. No other entity is going to come to save us. The only way we are going to address the climate crisis is by changing our behavior, getting off fossil fuels, moving towards renewable clean energy, creating a cleaner economy, helping the rest of the world along so that they don't have to make the same choices that we made in doubling down on a fossil fuel driven economy. So it's up to us. In the humanist perspective, I think, you know, very much frames it that way.
And Dr. Mann, I think you and I both welcome allies who come to climate action by way of religious beliefs or interpretation of scripture or any other thing that gets them there.
Right.
But I think you would agree it's important to give them a foundation of science as well, because the truth is people are leaving religion in droves. So it is far more durable and certain to make sure that people understand when it comes to this climate crisis. Thank you for whatever religious faith may bring you into an interfaith coalition, but science has to be the foundation. And what is at stake in terms of the choice between the Harris-Walz ticket and a second Trump presidency when it comes to basic science? I'll just let you close us out with that. And then I want to say a few nice words about my colleague, Jamie Raskin, who I know just joined us.
Yeah, well, you know, we do need allies wherever we can find them. And again, I'll appeal to, you know, the great Carl Sagan. He recognized that and he reached out to religious leaders. He understood that we have common values that we share and we can work towards some of the same goals. And, you know, in the end, whether it's religion or spirituality or just a sense of the awesome gift that we've been given, that we, you know, the laws of physics and chemistry and biology are enough to explain why we're here, what maintains our, you know, our home, our planetary home, what allows us to continue to live. And it sheds light on, you know, what I call my latest book, Our Fragile Moment. We are at this very fragile moment where we are potentially leaving this sort of envelope of climate variability during which we develop the infrastructure that, you know, supports 8+ billion people on the planet. That infrastructure was built for a climate that is disappearing. And if that climate disappears, then suddenly it really calls into question whether we can continue to support a global civilization of the sort that we find today. So again, you know, we don't need to appeal to religion. We can find cause in the physics, chemistry, and biology of our earthly home in justifying the actions that are necessary and voting for politicians. It's the most important thing we can do, which today are Democrats who will actually take the actions necessary to preserve this planetary home for us and future generations.
Thank you, Dr. Mann, for all your leadership, for reminding us that as much as we know about this vast universe, this is the only place for sure that sustains intelligent life and Republicans. So we had better take good care of it. And with that, I see he hasn't yet animated, but my dear friend Jamie Raskin has joined us, and it is time to hand off to him. I will let Hemet do that honor officially, but I just want to say, by way of this segue, that I founded the Freethought Caucus in Congress. I work a lot on church and making sure public policy is based on science and fact and critical thinking. There is one person in the United States Congress who is my go-to ally on all these things, who was my wingman in standing up this little Freethought Caucus that now has 24 members and is the place to do serious work on defending our secular democracy. And that person is the great Jamie Raskin, who just materialized on your screen. Hemet, if you want to go through other parts of his resume, you're welcome to do it. But I see that he just appeared, and I'm going to hand off to my great friend Jamie.
Hey, Jared, thank you so much. Thank you for being our essential, indispensable rabble-rouser for the Enlightenment in the 21st century, and for rocking the House and the Senate with the Freethought Caucus. It is my favorite organizational affiliation and identification. We have the most fun, we have the best arguments, and we have the funniest jokes. Maybe I'll start off with the joke, if that's all right with you guys, because this is how we usually kick it off in the Freethought Caucus. But St. Peter's in heaven, and he's walking down the hallway, and he passes God's office, and he peeks his head into God's office, and God's got his head in his hands like this. And St. Peter says, "God, what's wrong? You look really upset." And God says, "I am really upset. I'm in love with an atheist, and she doesn't even know I exist." There you go. A joke for you guys. Oh, I'm getting some laugh notations coming up on the screen, so they liked it. Jared, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you all for being here. It's all about the science. I got to say, I was elected to Congress the exact same night Donald Trump was elected to Congress. And it wasn't quite what I was expecting, to tell you the truth. And when we got in January, the very first bill that was sent to us by the new administration was to cut $4 billion from the NIH budget. Now, I'm the congressman from NIH. Bethesda and Rockville are in my district, along with a lot of other great scientific installations, including NOAA, the National Weather Service, NIMH, the FDA is in my district. I've got a whole bunch of them. And so I had to go to war immediately to defend NIH and to defend our budget. And I got up and I said, how could this new administration want to cut the funding that is necessary for the doctors and scientific researchers who are trying to get to the bottom of all of the killer diseases of humanity, like cystic fibrosis and multiple sclerosis and breast cancer and lung cancer and malignant narcissistic personality disorder. They had funded 3 projects into the research of malignant narcissistic personality disorder. But in any event, we created a bipartisan, nationwide, multi-state coalition to defeat these efforts to cut science funding. And we ended up increasing the NIH budget by $3 billion rather than cutting it by $4 billion, if my memory serves correctly. And so the fight for science is the fight for public health. It's the fight for medical research. It's the fight for excellence in public policy. It's the fight for education. And as Dr. Mann was just observing, it is the fight for the preservation of the human species on Earth because of climate change. I remember Donald Trump tweeted out very early on in his tenure. He said, climate change is a hoax perpetrated on the Americans by the Chinese. And I tweeted out, no, Donald Trump is a hoax perpetrated on the Americans by the Russians. And that seems to be more and more true every single day. Climate change is real. Climate change has been verified and authenticated. I remember I had a colleague, Jared, I don't know if you remember him, named Lamar Smith. And I'm a middle child. I like to bring people together. You know, it's all about birth order. I don't know if you've read Frank Sulliway's book, Born to Rebel. I recommend it highly to all of you scientists and humanists out there. But anyway, I've always tried to make bipartisan connection with people. And when I first got in, I had this friend named Lamar Smith from Texas and from, well, it's the district that's now represented by Chip Roy. But in any event, he was the chair of the House Committee on Science and Technology. So I thought, this guy will be my friend. And he was very, very nice, a lovely guy. He actually is not from Texas. He was born in Boston. He grew up in Boston as a Christian Scientist. His family was very close to Mary Baker Eddy's family, the founder of the Church of Christian Science. But anyway, he made his way to Texas and then became chair of the Science Committee. So one day we were sitting in the Judiciary Committee where I got to know him. And I said, Lamar, you know, we can disagree about abortion rights. I know we're going to, and we can disagree about tax rates for big corporations. I know we're going to disagree about that. But look, one thing on climate change, you guys have got to get serious because this is the fate of humanity that is in the balance here. And he said, well, Jamie, he said, you got your scientists and we got our scientists. And I said, like, that's not how science works. It's not rival party teams, you know? And so we were seated at a computer and I said, let's go to the great scientific installations in Maryland's beautiful 8th District. And so I went to NOAA and I went to FDA and went to NIH. And I said, look, all of them have a whole section on climate change and how it's serious. It's just a dagger at the throat of humanity. And they've got to incorporate it into all of the work they're doing. And he said, and I just said, all the professional scientists agree. It's not a question. So he said, well, I don't want to get in a big fight with you. But he said, but let me tell you this about professionals. He said, professionals built the Titanic. Amateurs built Noah's Ark. Okay. And it took a moment for that to sort of sink in what he was saying there. I said, wait a second, are you saying you want an amateur flying you back to Texas this weekend? And by the way, I think that what happened with the Titanic was not design error. I think that was human error. In any event, are you saying you just want 2 members of our species to survive? Is that your point about Noah Ark? But in any event, he was the best of them. And I realized, you know what? Like, we should reach out. We should constantly be trying to move people and educate people. And actually, I did send him some books about climate change. I sent him some Bill McKibben books. And one day he sent me an email back. He said, Jamie, check out these 2 articles. You'll find them interesting. One article said Lamar Smith changes tune on climate change. And I think it was in the Dallas Herald. And he'd basically made a speech saying he was willing to accept that the climate was in fact changing radically, had been destabilized. He wasn't sure if it was human causes, because I don't think he conceded that humans could have any impact on something as celestial and divine as the climate. But anyway, he acknowledged there was a problem and we needed to respond to it wherever the cause was. And I was amazed. And then I clicked on the other article and it said, Lamar Smith announces his retirement. So he obviously felt like he couldn't actually become a climate science positive member, and he retired. And then he's replaced by Chip Roy, who's another climate denier. And then anyway, so I realized, you know what? we're not going to be able to convince these people in time. We have to beat them. And that means we got to organize, we got to mobilize. If we had a national popular vote for president, it would be easy. If we had popular vote for Congress without gerrymandered districts, it would be easy. We've got millions and millions more pro-science, pro-reason people in the country. Hillary beat Trump by more than 3 million votes, even when she lost in the Electoral College in 2016. Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College in 2020. We're adding 14 million new voters, overwhelmingly young voters and new citizen voters. They have no interest in the bile and the poison that Donald Trump has to sell with his accomplices over on that side. Yeah, so we're going to have a massive popular mandate, but we've got to deal with the Electoral College arithmetic, and we got to deal with the gerrymandered districts, and we've got to compensate for their ability to use voter suppression tactics and gerrymandering of the districts, state and federal districts, and right-wing judicial activism and the filibuster and everything they're using to wall off the democratic process from popular participation. We've got to compensate for that through massive organizing and mobilizing people and making sure everybody goes out and votes at every level of the ballot, and make sure that the young people are registering and that they understand what the stakes are, and they need a voter plan of exactly where they're voting, when they're voting. Is it early voting they're doing? Is it mail-in balloting they're doing? Are they going on election day? Everybody needs a voter plan. So appoint yourselves your precinct masters on your block and your family, and make sure everybody goes and does it. Tell the young people what we teach the young people in Democracy Summer. Everything you need to know about voting in 2024 is everything you need to know about driving. If you want to go forward, you put it in D. If you want to go backwards, you put it in R. That's all they need to understand. Okay. So I'm going to leave you with the words of the great Tom Paine, who's an inspiration to Jared Huffman and to me. You know, he got over here in 1774, 2 years before the American Revolution. He fell in love with the promise of America. He said if this land could live up to its values and its principles, it would become an asylum to humanity. Not an insane asylum, mind you, okay? A place of refuge for people seeking freedom from political and religious and economic oppression from all over the world. And then Paine wrote Common Sense, by which he meant the sense we have in common if we're willing to use our other 5 senses in order to reason together and use rational process rather than church doctrine and dogma and what we would call today propaganda, disinformation, fake news, all of that stuff. And that ignited the American Revolution, but it was still a tough year because, as is recorded in a wonderful new book I'm reading by H.W. Brands called The First Civil War, the country was split down the middle. Half of the people were loyalists to the crown. And they said, you can't beat the kings and the queens and the monarchs and the fusion of church and state, and you can't beat church superstition and the crusades and the inquisitions and the witchcraft trials. That's just the fate of humanity. And the other half said, no, let's gamble with Tom Paine and Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and let's go with consent of the governed and life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Let's try to spell out the freedoms and the rights of the people, and let's have the people govern with no nobles, no titles of nobility, no kings and queens, no czars and no emperors, but people who are just public servants, faithful to the public experiment. But of course, on the liberal side, everybody's really nervous. Everybody's like, you know, have you checked the polls? Oh my God, the polls. And everybody's really upset. And, you know, what's the message and who's the messenger and all that stuff. Tom Paine wanted to write a pamphlet to give people courage and strength and hope. And he wrote this beautiful essay called The American Crisis. So I just want to quote a little passage for you. I'm going to update the language pursuant to instructions from Nancy Pelosi, who said Tom Paine was a feminist, that he was fighting for women's suffrage in the 18th century, as well as an abolitionist in the 18th century. But anyway, in The American Crisis, he said this. He said, these are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country. But everyone who stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. Let's make that victory ours in 2024. The humanists and rationalists of the world, thank you for what you're doing with your hearts and your minds. Go out and get votes every single day. That's the message right now. Just go get us votes. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much. Do you know how dispiriting it is to have to follow Representative Raskin? But I so appreciate everything he said. Thank you so much. You heard what Representative Raskin said. Have a voting plan. I live in Illinois. It's a state where mail-in voting and early voting is very easy to do. I'm done. I can spend now until Election Day helping other people vote. If you are watching this, make your election plan. As he said, get to the voting booth as soon as possible so you don't have to wait until November 5th. And then, as you are seeing in the links, volunteer, donate. Let's make sure other people around us can do the same thing. Okay, now, next up, it is such a pleasure to introduce you to Sarah Levin. She's the co-founder and executive director of Secular Democrats of America. She is the reason we are all here tonight. She's also an atheist and open humanist who is on the Democratic National Committee's Interfaith Council, giving us a seat at the table, which is such a big deal and something I didn't think I could ever say several years ago. She's also the founder and principal at Secular Strategies, a consulting firm specializing in secular policy and non-religious Americans. I don't say this lightly, and I don't say this with hyperbole. There are very few people in our broad movement that I truly admire, but Sarah is without a doubt one of the best, and such a pleasure to introduce all of you to her.
Thank you, Hammond. That's so kind of you. I'm so proud and honored to bring together all of our incredible speakers today to rally support for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. But more than anything else, this event is about you, the folks tuning in. You are the ones who can make a difference in this election by donating your time and chipping in what you can. So if you haven't already, please click the links in the chat and sign up to volunteer and donate. When you sign up using these links, you're not only supporting the future of our democracy, you're also bringing visibility to the non-religious community. A lot of the work that we do at Secular Dems is advocating for full inclusion of our community in the Democratic Party. We envision a world where candidates are eagerly seeking the endorsement of secular Democrats, where local humanist and atheist community groups become a go-to campaign stop, where our community has a seat at the table, like Hemant was saying, when our party is making key decisions about its platform and its messages on issues that we care deeply about. And here's two reasons why all of that is really important. First of all, we have a unique perspective on issues that is valuable. I hope you've noticed so far on this call, and you'll continue to notice that the way that we think about climate, about reproductive rights, about LGBTQ rights and democracy is unique to our secular worldview. When you don't believe in gods or an afterlife, there is a certain urgency in this one life and in this one planet that we have that motivates us to take action. So contrary to the idea that we're some kind of political liability, our inclusion is actually, I would argue, a net positive to the Democratic coalition. The other reason that this work is important is that, of course, in a representative democracy, we should be seeing a whole lot more openly non-religious people running and winning public office. We are at least 28% of Americans are non-religious, but we're still not seeing that kind of representation. We're still underrepresented, but that is changing thanks to the leadership of people like Congressman Huffman, the only open non-theist in Congress, Representative Rabb, who you're going to hear from next. But all of that doesn't happen in a vacuum. Elected officials and candidates need to know that the community will show up for them, just like you are right now. A huge part of Congressman Huffman's story of coming out as a humanist, and he's shared this publicly, is connecting with the folks at the Center for Freethought Equality, which is the advocacy arm of the American Humanists Association. having that support of our community at that time was critical. And the same goes for the candidates that have our secular Dems affiliates in Pennsylvania, Nebraska, and Texas supporting them. By providing that grassroots support with our time and our dollars in the name of secular Dems, we're showing candidates that if they stand with us, if they show up for us as strong advocates for separation of church and state, combating white Christian nationalism, if they do that, we will show up for them. So if you want to stay up to date on the atheist and humanist candidates running for office and get involved, you can become a member of the Center for Freethought Equality for free. The link is in the chat. And if you want to get involved in secular Dems, maybe even start one in your state, join us at seculardems.org. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to turn it over back to Hemant.
And by the way, as Sarah is saying, when it comes to openly non-religious candidates, there are more openly non-religious candidates on the ballot at the state level and the federal level this year than at any time in the past. And that is a direct, I think, correlation to the work you're doing. And so thank you so much for that. Let me introduce you all to State Representative Chris Rabb of Pennsylvania. He was first elected in 2016. He is a father, an educator, a social justice activist, and an author. He wrote the book Invisible Capital: How Unseen Forces Shape Entrepreneurial Opportunity. Representative Rabb, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Hello, fellow heathens from Philadelphia. I bid you a good evening. I'm really honored to be on with so many amazing people. Congressman Huffman, who I got a chance to hang out with recently, the incomparable Sarah Levin, and Dr. Michael Mann, who is just 7 miles away from my district in Northwest Philadelphia. Humble brag, I represent the bluest dot in the most pivotal state, battleground state in the United States of America. That is the 200th legislative district. I'm in my 4th term. I also am on the ballot on November 5th. And my first election night was the same as Representative Raskin's when what's his name, the orange one, was elected. And it's been quite a wild ride. I am very proud to be a part of this community. I have joked that I have been a closeted agnostic, but the closet door is made out of glass. When I took office, when I was inaugurated in January of 2017, I proudly swore on very old Constitution, U.S. and Pennsylvania state Constitution, and have done so ever since, and will be doing so on the first Monday of January when I'm reelected, and hopefully that will be along with President Kamala Harris and Vice President Tim Walz. There is a diversity of folks on this Zoom call. There's a diversity of folks who will be showing up to vote for our next president. And that diversity has value. Some people are voting for Harris and Walz. Some people are voting against Donald Trump. And of course, there are folks who are doing both. Irrespective of why you come out to vote and get others to do the same, we need to hold whomever is in office to account. I am much more confident that we can hold a President Harris to account versus the Orange Menace. And part of that, it will ensure that we will not devolve into theocracy, and that we will value the separation of church and state. We will value science, but so much more, because science can be used, it can also be misused. And as someone who descends from 16 great-great-grandparents who were born across 6 states, all where slavery is the state law, I understand the value of struggle and believing in things that very few people believed and thought could ever change. So if we could get rid of the peculiar institution, which created extraordinary financial wealth for the 1%, we can do anything. I represent a majority Black district that has a very active Jewish population, a very active Muslim population, and a humble and confident secular community as well. In fact, the only mosque in my district used to be a church, which used to be a synagogue. I also represent a neighborhood that inspired the term white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So for my first 3 terms in office, I represented the whitest people in America. So I understand the value of diversity, diversity of thought, diversity of with regard to ethnicity, LGBTQ issues. I have a very active queer community, and I'm very proud of being able to be at the tip of the spear in terms of what happens on November 5th. Again, I have the largest number of registered Democrats and the highest voter turnout in my district. I take nothing for granted. So I'm constantly trying to get people to understand why it's important to vote, particularly those folks who do not easily get on the bandwagon for candidates who may be picking up steam, but who they have serious policy concerns with. And I say to them, voting for a candidate is not sending a love letter. It is deciding how you choose to hold people to account. And that's what we must do. And we can do it that much more meaningfully if we do it together, and we do it with authenticity and care and intentionality. So I'm thrilled to be a part of this moment. I'm thrilled to be part of this growing community of non-religious, aggressively heathen folks. I kid. I'm also a tree hugger, and I really enjoyed listening to my tree hugging colleagues in elective office, and of course, Dr. Mann. The reason I actually took office was because my grandmother was a radical Christian who was very progressive before feminism, before environmental justice. She was doing the work, and she helped make sure an incinerator was not put in her Black working class neighborhood while her white neighbors down the street got a free public pool. And that happened 2 years before I was born. And she was my most meaningful political mentor. And I picked up the mantle and really focused on climate action, environmental justice, and have been so inspired by Carl Sagan and so many other people. I'm honored really to be on this call with Sasha and Ann and all of you. This is work we all must embrace together and understand that this moment is our moment. What are we going to do with it? So thank you all so much. I pass it back to Hemant.
Thank you so much, Representative Rabb. And one thing that you point out that I hope people take to heart is that, yes, voting is important. Yes, donating and volunteering is so important. But you know what else is important? Running for office yourself, not necessarily for state rep or Congress, but for school board, for city council, for all those local races that sometimes get overlooked. And yet we all know how much impact they have when it comes to church-state separation and all the issues we care about. And with that said, let me introduce our next speaker, Raven Schwam Curtis. She is a educator who really explores the intersectional histories with a focus on Black and Jewish relationality. And I know that the topic she's speaking about is something that is near and dear to so many of you. It's one of the reasons so many of you are motivated to vote this time around, perhaps even more so than in the past, which is Project 2025, Christian Nationalism and Reproductive Justice. Raven, all yours.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the very warm introduction. Good evening, everyone. My name is Raven Schwam Curtis, and I'm so thrilled to be in community and conversation with fellow humanists who, like me, value reason, compassion, and justice in shaping our world. It's no secret to any of us that just 20 days out from the election, we're at a pivotal moment. The very foundation of this thing we're continually aspiring towards, called democracy, which is supposed to uphold separation of church and state, is under threat by the rising tide of Christian nationalism. I speak to you on this topic as a Gen Z, Black and Jewish woman who belongs to an interfaith family encapsulating Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish relatives. So if anyone can appreciate the many ways spirituality and religion can add value to one's personal life, it's me. But this issue is not about a difference in faith or belief systems. It's about power, about a movement that seeks to impose a singular, narrow worldview on all of us, disregarding our pluralistic values. A movement that seeks to weaponize a particular and myopic reading of Christianity to coercively implement laws that disregard what the majority of constituents want. A movement that feigns to be pro-life, but is simply pro-forced birth. A movement that is exacerbating the Black maternal mortality crisis by causing preventable deaths, as in the case of Amber Thurman, by creating structures that deny needed care. A movement that pounds its chest about religious freedom while disallowing the religious freedoms of other communities, including the Jewish community, that permits abortion, especially to protect the life of the parent. A movement that disallows freedom from religion, and a movement that is fundamentally undemocratic. Just days ago, thousands of Christian nationalists gathered in DC, notably on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, to further cement their political influence, advocate for the re-election of Trump, and peddle anti-LGBTQ+ rhetoric. It should come as no surprise that a movement that bypasses the consent of the American people to forcibly impose its agenda is also a fertile breeding ground for multiple iterations of bigotry. The timing of this event speaks volumes. It is not coincidental, but intentional, and a reminder of how far they are willing to go to erode the feature that makes this country so beautiful, our diversity. This is why this election matters so much. Kamala Harris has consistently stood up for the protection of individual freedoms, including religious freedom, freedom from religion, and reproductive rights. She has been an advocate for keeping the church out of state affairs. She understands that a democracy works best when it respects all belief systems without elevating one above the others. Kamala Harris is a candidate who knows the power of humanism and empathy in governance. So as humanists, it's time to act. We need to mobilize, to stand up against those who want to tear down the wall separating church and state. This election isn't just about policies. It's about how we want to steer the continually unfolding experiment that we call the United States. Who do we want to be? Let's choose a leader who shows us time and again that she's fighting for freedom and liberty for all. Let's vote for Kamala Harris. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raven. And I'm going to move it along here just so we're mindful of everyone's time. Our next speaker is Kaylee Whalen, who is a PhD student at UC Davis. And Kaylee has represented the LGBTQ+ community, the disability community, the Latin community as a public speaker. Kaylee has spoken twice at the Obama White House, and coolest thing any of us will ever have in our bios, in 2020, she represented the United States as Miss USA in Miss International Queen, the world's most prestigious transgender pageant. Kaylee, all yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I started my career at the American Humanists Association, helping ensure that we fundraised to support humanist values and opening checks and making thank you calls from many of you, including some of you on the call. And I now am, a scholar looking at how we can provide a sense of belonging through ritual, through, in very much the same vein as Greg Epstein and humanist chaplains are doing, to provide existential counseling and help and a place of belonging for transgender people denied that by a culture, by politicians saying that we don't exist or we don't deserve to exist, that our identities are not real. And they're not just saying that. Over 530 bills proposed in states across the country to take away transgender people's rights. 47% of transgender people in this country have said that they want to move to another state because they're afraid of living, in their state because their rights are being taken away. 39% of trans youth live in a state that's passed bans on gender-affirming care. And behind me, I have an agender flag. identify as non-binary or agender or transgender. And I thought of ironing the flag. But there's a little joke in the LGBT community that we don't iron our flags out of solidarity for all the people who have to keep the flag hidden away in a closet or in a drawer because they can't be out all the time. So I didn't iron it. But I am proud to be LGBT. I am proud to represent my community. I'm proud to represent disability justice community. I'm wearing a Starbucks Workers United pin. I'm a member of the AUW. Actually, we're organized as grad students under AUW. So I'm a labor organizer. These are things that one candidate does not support. You know, Harris supports organized labor, supports LGBT rights, you know, and we really need, as Representative Jamie Raskin said, we do need mass organizing to get people to vote. But we need it for more than just voting. Disability activist Lydia X.C. Brown, who ran for an election for the Maryland House of Delegates in 2022, said that with the Harris campaign, we are fighting for the conditions we will be organizing under, that we will need to continue to push Harris and Democrats and elected officials to make change for the community. It does not stop at the ballot box. So we need to be organizing at the Supreme Court for reproductive justice, for trans rights. You know, we need solidarity with those affected by settler colonialism and Islamophobia. And we need to fight for trans children being denied the right to be themselves, the right to simply make decisions about their own lives with the support of their parents and their medical providers. And we have parents being told they'll be separated from the children if they support their trans kids. They're told that teachers and medical providers will be taught that they'll lose their jobs or they'll be even prosecuted under law if they support trans kids. Again, 26 states have passed laws banning gender-affirming care. Nearly half the country is passing laws. And we need a stronger Democratic Party pushing back against this. I do not think the federal government is doing enough right now. And we need to push for the federal government to push back. And there is one government that will be open to this, and there's one that will not. So that is the message I want to share here. And again, you know, there was something mentioned earlier that in like earlier society, you know, we maybe had the supernatural beliefs, or I kind of want to push back on the idea that like we lived in a more primitive time and like we're past the point of needing ritual, or even we're past the point of needing religion. We need a place for community and solidarity and existential meaning and belonging. And we have had many societies throughout history that have, you know, honored transgender people, that have honored cultural diversity. And that is something as a sociocultural anthropologist I've been researching. So it's not just about progress moving forward to some promised future, but also looking back to the past for societies that have been more open and accepting and building that now. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much to Kaylee. And I just want to reiterate something Kaylee was saying. There are so many people out there who are counting on the election to go a particular way for Kamala Harris to win. Think about not just your vote, not just what you want, but think about LGBTQ people. Think about non-Christians or non-conservative Christians and immigrants and refugees and anyone who plans to be alive in 50 years, because they're going to need a planet that's not ravished by climate change. So again, you're not just voting because you want a particular outcome. You're doing it in the spirit of humanism for so many other people. So we have one final speaker tonight. I'm so honored to be able to introduce him. Andrew Seidel is a constitutional and civil rights attorney. He's the author of two fantastic books: The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, and also American Crusade, how the Supreme Court is weaponizing religious freedom. He is my personal go-to guy when I have questions about pretty much anything involving the Constitution, and really one of the most well-spoken voices in our movement to talk about these issues. Andrew?
This is a pivotal and scary moment for our country, but I have hope, tremendous hope, and that's what I want to end us on tonight. As humanists, we value equality. In this election, we are standing up to a wave of white Christian nationalism that would drown this country in inequality. They want power and privilege and deference and legal favoritism at the expense of everyone else. We face a choice in this election. Do we continue to aspire to the unmet promise in the first words of our godless Constitution, that we the people means everyone? Or do we go back? I'm not going back. We're not going back. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are not going back. Trump and his Christian nationalists, and not all Christians are Christian nationalists, are working to privilege the chosen few, the straight, white, conservative Christian men. And believe it or not, that's one reason I'm so hopeful. There is a basic definitional truth at the heart of this fight. Their power-hungry aggression is growing our movement. Their wins, capturing the Supreme Court, overturning Roe versus Wade, the immunity decision, their wins swell our ranks. Every legislative and legal victory that they notch alienates more people, wakes more people up to the danger, and drives people away from them. Their power-hungry aggression is growing our movement. And just look at their policies, their rhetoric at Project 2025, which are full of just benighted and wildly unpopular ideas. Right? They oppose marriage equality. 71% of Americans support it. They want to outlaw abortion. 55% of Americans think it should be legal. They want a nation of Christians like them. 73% of Americans are more welcoming of religious pluralism. They probably ban contraception too, but something like 91% of Americans are in favor. And those numbers terrify them. They are scared. They're scared because of you. Because Americans are leaving religion behind, because, as evidenced by this call, and thanks to groups like Secular Dems, we are beginning to turn our demographic growth into political power. They're scared because of marriage equality, because every day we are closer to racial and gender and LGBTQ equality, because we elected our first Black president, and we are about to elect our first Black, South Asian, and female president. Christian nationalists are raging against the dying of their privilege, and while they are raging, we are working to meet the unmet promise in foundational ideas like we the people, meaning all the people. Equality, inclusion, and justice for all. Kamala Harris has dedicated her career to those ideals, right? Kamala Harris for the people. And as we continue to march toward that progress, knowing we still have a long way to go, Christian nationalists fight harder. They are not going to go gently. They are going to rage against the dying of their privilege. And Trump is the avatar for their rage, but he's also their last gasp, their last chance to seize power for this generation. If we work, we can win, because they fight only for themselves. They want supremacy, we want equality. That's why in the end we can triumph, not because our principle is inherently better than theirs, though it definitely is, but because we have the numbers. And elections are all about numbers. And though I am hopeful, I am not foolish, because hope, like prayer, is no substitute for hard work. Election day is in 3 weeks, 21 days, less than 500 hours away. Make the most of that time. Donate, volunteer, spend a few of those hours phone banking or text banking to get the vote out in one of those swing states. Do not waste your time doom scrolling or bemoaning the race on social media or looking at the polls. Click on that volunteer link right now. Then put your head down and do some damn work to help elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and a Democratic Congress. Vote all the way down the ballot. America will never be a Christian nation, because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America. And this is the choice that we face in this election: Christian nationalism or America, because those two things tend not peacefully coexist. One will triumph. Put in the work now to make sure it's the right one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And he's right. Let's make sure none of us have any regrets on November 6th, that we didn't do all we could. You know, as humanists, we cannot wait for a savior to swoop in and save us, but we are the ones we've been waiting for. So thank you so much for taking time out of all of your schedules to join us tonight. Thank you to Sarah and Secular Democrats of America for putting this together. And now all of you should figure out, what can you donate? How much time can you give? How are you going to volunteer? As Andrew was saying, we have 3 weeks until Election Day. Let's make every one of those days until then count. Let's volunteer. Let's talk to our friends and family and encourage them to vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz so that we can keep moving in the right direction. As they say, we are not looking back. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.